Great. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to share our work here. Yeah, I'm Chris Yeager. I'm a research hydrologist with the USGS. We're with the Washington Water Science Center that's based in Tacoma. And yeah, I'm talking today about a statistical model we developed to provide estimates of late summer surface flow in headwater streams in Mount Rainier. And so we're talking about late summer surface flow. The figure to the left is this small stream that definitely has flow, continuous flow through it. To the right, you've got a kind of high elevation stream channel that's dry with no surface flow. And in the middle, if you look real close, there's some dark areas, and this is just kind of on the threshold where it may not be continuously flowing, but there is surface water present. Next slide. And starting with the problem statement, there is less stream flow in years of low snowpack. And so in 2015, there was the Great Western Snow Drought, where the western half of the US received most of its precipitation as rain and not as snow. And so this figure here shows, with all the red, shows areas where the snow water equivalent was well below normal. And this black star is where Mount Rainier is. So there was essentially a snow drought. This picture to the right is what Mount Rainier looked like that year during the summertime. And that surface water, that flow in streams provides water supply in Mount Rainier for park facilities, where this picture here to the lower left is a location where there's an outtake where flow from the streams is withdrawn and to help support park facilities. It also provides flow in streams, provides aquatic habitat. So this critter here is a little frog in a small stream. And it's also drinking water for backcountry hikers and recreational users. And so a fundamental question is we actually just don't know which streams go dry or will have flow from year to year. Next slide. And so our objective was to develop a streamflow permanence model that was specific to Mount Rainier National Park. And when we talk about streamflow permanence, it's the reliability of streamflow. So is that streamflow there year to year, all year round, or will you have some dry spells? So we're not necessarily looking at how much flow, but we're just talking about just presence, absence of flow. And our approach here was to use an existing model, streamflow permanence model that is specific for the whole Pacific Northwest region. So this is called the PROSPER model. And next few slides, I'll go into that. But it's a regional scale model for all of Washington, most of Oregon, Idaho, and these surrounding adjacent states. Use the covariates that were used in that model and use the same empirical approach, and then apply it to a smaller area that is Mount Rainier and the surrounding foothills, apply new covariates that are specific to the park, and also provide new observations that are specific to the park. So next slide. So some background about what PROSPER is. It's an acronym for the probability of stream flow permanence. And really what it is it provides an estimate of whether in terms of a probability of whether there's going to be flow year round or not. So as an example, the top figure is for August 2011, and you can see the stream kind of a ribbon of dark color through that main valley, and then there's a couple of tributaries. And in 2013, the figure below, it's the same stream section, but there's a couple areas where you can just see that there's not any flow, like around here, and in this tributary, it looks to be dry. Next slide. And what PROSPER does is it provides predictions or in terms of a probability or a confidence of whether that section of stream, that 30-meter section of stream, is going to have flow year round. And we know that this changes from year to year depending on the hydroclimatology of the year, like whether there was a lot of precipitation and other factors. And so these colors to the right that are darker, are more red, warmer colors indicate lower probabilities of year-round flow. And that matches with 2013 for this area. That was a drier year, whereas other parts in other years, this top figure shows these cooler colors. There's a higher confidence of having year-round flow with these blue colors, for example. Okay, next slide. And so then what happens is then, we get these predictions at these very small 30-meter grids, and it provides an annual probability or an annual estimate for specific years, for 2004 to 2016. So it doesn't predict into the future, and it's based off of what were the climate conditions for a given year. So it's almost like a hind cast or a back casting of what happened. And so it's for pretty large areas for this whole Pacific Northwest region, but you get information all the way down to these 30-meter pixels. And in terms of this probability, what it is it scales either from 0 to 1 or from 0 to 100%, with the middle, which is either 0.5 or 50% being that threshold. And so to the left, where if you have probabilities less than 0.5 or less than 50%, these are more likely to go dry. And then to the right, these are the areas that are more likely to flow year round. Okay, next slide. And then just a little bit of background about Prosper. This is a random forest algorithm. So it's an empirical machine learning approach. It uses a whole range of climatic and physiographic covariates. So these are a list of the physiographic covariates of topography, land use, land cover, soils, a little bit of information about the geology in terms of permeability and base flow index. And then there's also climatic covariates of annual precipitation, temperature, snow water equivalent, and evapotranspiration. And then importantly, this is calibrated on very simple flow, no flow observations. So these are just one-time observations of a visual inspection of somebody as part of a like a habitat survey or other stream surveys of whether there was flow on a given date at a given stream location. And so that's where all these points are that helped to calibrate the model. Next slide. And then again, this is what you end up with. You get these estimates everywhere for all streams. And for the Prosper model, this is for the flow lines that are approximately the NHD, the National Hydrographic Dataset, medium resolution hydrography. So for folks who are familiar, there's a couple different types of hydrographies that the USGS has. This one's a little bit coarser because it's for this large area. And again, you get these probabilities, like all of this information you get at probabilities of from 0 to 1, where to the left, you have a lower probability of year-round flow. To the right, you have a higher probability of year-round flow, and what left and right of this 0.5 threshold. Okay, next slide. And so that's Prosper. And what we wanted to do was essentially do a local Prosper from Mount Rainier, just building off of what's already the existing framework and infrastructure and just adding to it that's specific to our study site. So it's a smaller study area. It's Mount Rainier and the surrounding foothills. And so that's what this area is. And you can see that in blue, that's the catchment area of or the modeling domain. We used all the existing Prosper covariates, so that list I had in the prior slide. And then we added additional covariates that are more specific to the Mount Rainier area. So we included characterization of geology. We just did basic geologic groups of consolidated geology or unconsolidated, making some sort of hypotheses about what we think how this would, different geologic types would either like be more permeable or less permeable, or facilitate, like if they were more consolidated, then they were essentially were less permeable, and they would have potentially more direct immediate runoff, especially in these like higher elevation zones. We included a couple different ways of describing topography, so specifically curvature, which has implications on how flow or how water is draining or running off of a landscape. And we also included drainage area, which is not included in the original larger scale Prosper. And then the other big thing is we had new observations. So the Prosper at the large regional area, there was no data. There were no observations for this area. So Prosper was not well at the regional level, was not well represented, or Mount Rainier was not well represented. So all of these points are new points that were collected in 2018, 2019, and 2020 with a huge effort by the park and facilitated by Rebecca Lofgren there, who also just spearheaded and shepherded this project and was a big supporter of this project to make it possible. But their team at the park collected most of this data over this time period using this new application that USGS developed called Floper. And I'll get into that in the next slide. So next slide. So Floper is a mobile application that you can use on your phone or your tablet, and it's a feature mapping application. So it's to characterize streamflow permanence and the geomorphic and hydrographic network. So it's essentially identifying, yes, this is a stream, this is a channel, and whether there's flow or not. And so it's meant to be a rapid assessment, so just quick observations. You can use it anywhere. It has a standardized survey, so there's a short list of questions. It's, as I said, it's usable on Android or iOS, so on your cell phone or on your tablet. And this is meant to be just a quick observation. So you do not, you have to get out of the car, that would be ideal, but you don't necessarily need to do this intensive like data collection effort in the field. And it's also accessible or freely, it's free, easy to use software. Okay, next slide. And we piloted Floper in 2018. And so this data is collected for Mount Rainier was based off of like kind of a pilot of 2018 and 2019. And then we launched it in 2020 officially. And so this generally shows where up to date, I think this is up to 2023, all the data that's been collected. So the focus has been in the Pacific Northwest. There's some starts of data being collected elsewhere in the US. And you can see just to the left, or I'm sorry, to the right in the little south of Seattle, there's a cluster of data, and that's this Mount Rainier observations. And so this data is housed in the Esri ArcGIS online environment for like users specific to Floper, but then we pull that data and archive it for long-term in USGS Sciencebase so that it's accessible to everybody. It's publicly accessible. Okay, next slide. And so that's like the whole background. So this next slide is just, you know, talking about, okay, well, what is the model? And so just really quickly, we did that, we built that Prosper model, new covariates, new data from Floper, and then we came up with estimates of streamflow permanence for streams in our study area. So the model accuracy for accurate, so it's accurate classification of a wet or dry observation. That's how we evaluate accuracy, was 74%. So it's pretty good. Prosper, the regional one, the Prosper Pacific Northwest, the accuracy was 80% for that whole larger domain. So a little bit less accuracy. But the next slide will show you that it is actually still an improvement over the regional model. The most important variables for this model was drainage area, the geology. So that was a new covariate that we added to this local model. Topography, curvature ended up being helpful and being an important variable, and land cover, specifically percent forest. And you can just see that this is what the data look like. You've got these cooler colors are cooler blue colors correspond to high streamflow permanence probabilities. These are the areas that have high likelihood of having late summer surface flow. These warmer colors of orange and yellow that are on these kind of small tributary canyons that are away from you know, Mount Rainier. And from the glaciated areas or areas draining glaciers, those have lower probabilities. So these are areas or streams that are more likely to go dry. Next slide. And so what this figure shows is just a demonstration of the improvement of the local model over the regional model. So what these are just a distribution of the probabilities, that's those streamflow permanence probabilities for wet observations and dry observations. And so to the right, this is for the regional model, the Prosper Pacific Northwest. And for the wet and dry observations that were newly collected, Prosper had this was the range of Prosper predictions. And what you would expect is that they would be different. You would have lower probabilities for the dry observations and higher probabilities for the wet observations, and essentially they're overlapping. So the Prosper regional model is just not able to discern what is a wet or a dry stream in this study area. Whereas the local model, which is to the left here, this left panel, these are for the Mount Rainier specific Prosper model. You can see there's more distinct separation. The dry observations are concentrated to the left of this 0.5 threshold. The wet observations generally are to the right, even though there's quite a bit of overlap, and that's where we get our like 74% accuracy. But the fact that we get any differentiation compared to what's on the right here is encouraging. That predictions out of here are more accurate compared to the regional model. Next slide. And so then some take homes about this model is that many streams actually go dry in Mount Rainier. So this bar chart here is just a breakout or a split up of dry. Okay, I see that. Dry or flowing or this non-determinant class. And so if you can kind of bin the probabilities, about a third or more than a third, about 37% of the streams are predicted to go get dry. And those are based off of having SPPs, or probabilities of less than 40%. And then slightly more are expected to have year-round flow. And this summarization is just for the park boundary. I mean, really, it's streams that are not flowing from the perennial snowfield. So this figure to the right that shows where the glaciers are in the perennial areas of snow. Streams that are not flowing from these perennial glaciers or snowfields or higher elevation ridges have higher probabilities of going dry. So the streams to the lower right in the southeast corner of this figure here, or as you get farther away and not directly draining the glaciers, these are the streams that go dry. Next slide. So some take-home messages is that at least a third of the streams in Mount Rainier likely go dry during the late summer season. At a regional level, we are incorporating these new observations to, so updates to the regional model are active. And so we're hoping that we will get better estimates moving forward. And then also just a key thing is that new flow and no flow observations like you can get in FLOPR are needed to improve accuracy in these high elevation regions. So over here, this figure shows, Mount Rainier. This figure is what the wet and dry observations were used for Prosper. And so there's no data in the Cascades. There's no data in Mount Rainier. There's no data in the Olympics. And so these areas currently are not represented, but we know streams, there are non-perennial streams in these locations. And then my final slide, next slide. It's just areas to, or like these are links to learn more. There's a fact sheet that just came out earlier this month about this project. The models fully described in hydrological processes. This is an open access journal article. And then if you want to learn more about about FLOPR, you can, there's a user guide. You can join FLOPR by sending an email to this email below, or just reach out to me. And this project was funded by the USGS NRPP program. And as I said, Rebecca Lofgren at Mount Rainier was just a huge advocate and, was the driver of this project. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dr. Yeager. That was great. Just right off the top, I believe if you could speak to a little more what you think the sort of management implication. Obviously, there's some concerns ahead, right, with less water and visitor use, and where the park is going to be focusing visitor use and such. Have you had a chance to talk with management about these results yet, or could you just tell us a little more what you think those implications might be or what it could inform?
Yeah, I think because this data are or the model outputs is spatially explicit, it can identify areas where where you're like, oh, this is a dry zone, and these are areas that are going to go dry. Or you can identify areas that are like those indeterminate, like where there's probabilities of 0.4 to 0.6. Those might be areas that you want to check out or monitor. I mean, maybe these are areas where either they're not well described or captured in the model, and that's why they're not definitively like to the left or right of that 0.5 threshold, or these are areas that are maybe sensitive to climate change. And so in areas that they will be dry, if they will go dry if you don't have like a good snowpack that year. And so that can have implications like overlaying this with like water temperature data sets in terms of like what's aquatic and like stream habitat availability. You could have stranding potentially. I mean, these are just ways where, because it's spatially explicit, you can identify locations in the park that you may want to keep an eye on if stream drying is an issue. And then also you could, I mean, this is also helpful for like water use in terms of recreational maps and stuff like that for recreational use. So backpackers or whoever, you can identify like where's a dry area. Folks maybe need to be carrying water, a little bit more water, a little longer later in the day.
Great, thank you. Then we had one question from the chat, and then we'll break for lunch. How well did geology correlate with stream bed traits, which are important for intermittence?
Yeah, so that's a great question. In the discussion, we do talk about that, like this model at this level did not deal with any kind of field observations in terms of stream, like what were like conditions, the geomorphic conditions. There is a section about whether, in terms of substrate, like was there fine or coarse grained sediments, but and that would be the best information we had, but it's still very, very coarse. So the FLOPR survey does not really, I think, in any way robustly characterize the stream conditions. And so we're not able to capture that. And we're still trying to figure out what is the important, because we're still trying to modify and improve FLOPR. What are key questions that we can get at that could talk about on the ground conditions that would then be useful in modeling.
Great. Okay, there is one more question in the chat, but we have passed the noon mark, so I want to be respectful of the agenda and release folks for their lunch break. But maybe Dr. Gager, if you want to stick around a couple minutes longer, I will too, if you want to answer a couple more questions. I just want to thank all the presenters so much, both for the research you're doing in our parks and helping us managers be able to make informed, data-driven decisions, facing a lot of challenges, managing access and stewardship. So thank you all so much. And if anyone's looking for a small little national historical park at the mouth of the Columbia River as a research site, let me know. We would love to have more research going on in our little park down here too. Everyone else, I encourage you strongly to stick around and come back after lunch for the afternoon. We've got some great sessions. I think I'm going to have to be bouncing back and forth because both the coastal concerns and past as present have some really intriguing topics still left for the rest of the day. So thank you all. If you want to go to lunch, I'll stick around for a minute longer with my camera on. Kristen, if you wanted to, I don't know if you can see John Betch's question in the chat or if you'd like me to read it.
Yeah, I see it. I'm responding to him now. Yes, okay. So for wet and dry observations, yeah, that's a good question. Those predictions for like the comparison of to the regional model, yes, those were based on the out of bag predictions. So they were based off of the held out. And they essentially, for the wet and dry observations, it was not like what they were calibrated to. Hopefully that answers your question. And then also, are the probabilities based on the random forest tree voting or some other data set? Yeah, no, the probabilities are based on the tree voting. So how often did you get the probability. Ultimately, it's a classification, but you do it over and over and over and over again, and then you end up with kind of a distribution or a probability of those wet or dry votes. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, I'm happy to follow up because I garble my responses all the time. So please reach out.
Okay, well, thanks again. Everyone, have a nice lunch, and I'll see you around. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Take care. Thank you.